Imagine an island so remote, it's little more than a speck in the heart of the Indian Ocean. An atoll of coral and sand, thousands of miles from any major landmass, seemingly lost to time. This is Diego Garcia. But this island is not forgotten. It is one of the most secretive and strategically vital military installations on the planet, a critical linchpin in America's global power structure. This didn't happen by accident. In the 1960s and 70s, the island's entire native population, the Chagossians, were forcibly removed by the British government to make way for a military project. The land was then leased to the United States. The initial cost of the agreement was just $14 million, a fee the US covered by simply forgiving research and development charges on the UK's Polaris nuclear missile program. In exchange, the Pentagon gained an unsinkable aircraft carrier. From the 12,000-foot runway built by Navy Seabees, long-range B-2 Spirit and B-52 Stratofortress bombers can reach deep into Asia and the Middle East, unseen and unchallenged, a critical logistics and strike node for American power. This single, controversial island is the perfect entry point into a much larger, often invisible network. Across the world's largest continent, from the deserts of the Middle East to the volcanic islands of the Pacific, the United States maintains a web of military power unprecedented in history. But in an era of shifting alliances and hypersonic weapons, is this network a pillar of global stability, or a brittle relic of a past empire dangerously exposed? Why are these bases there? What is their true significance today? And what is the human cost of this unseen empire? To understand America's military posture in Asia today, you have to go back to the world of yesterday. The network of bases that defines the 21st century was forged in the crucible of the 20th. It is a direct legacy of the outcomes of World War II and the Korean War, conflicts that created facts on the ground that persist to this day, locking allies and adversaries into a complex web of dependence and deterrence. The story begins in the ruins of Imperial Japan. The American occupation following World War II was not merely about punishing a defeated enemy. It was a grand strategic project to rebuild and reshape Japan into a democratic capitalist bulwark against the rising tide of communism in Asia. The formal end of the war came with the 1951 San Francisco Peace Treaty, which restored Japan's sovereignty. But this restoration came with a non-negotiable condition, signed the very same day, the 1951 US-Japan Security Treaty. Initially, this treaty was profoundly one-sided. Japan, disarmed by its new American written constitution and utterly defenseless, granted the United States the right to station its land, air, and sea forces in and about Japan. The stated purpose was to contribute to the maintenance of international peace and security in the Far East, but it also gave the US the right to use its forces to put down large-scale internal riots and disturbances in Japan at the government's request. Critically, the original treaty placed no explicit obligation on the United States to defend Japan if it were attacked. This was the price Japan paid to end the occupation and regain its place in the world. This legal framework allowed for a colossal American military footprint. At the time, the US had 260,000 troops stationed across 2,824 facilities on Japanese soil. The treaty was revised in 1960 to be more reciprocal, formally committing the US to defend Japan. But the fundamental bargain, US bases in exchange for a Japanese security guarantee, remains the bedrock of the alliance to this day. The American security shield had a profound and perhaps unintended consequence. It allowed a generation of Japanese leaders, most famously Prime Minister Shigeru Yoshida, to adopt what became known as the Yoshida Doctrine. With its defense outsourced to the United States, Japan could minimize its own military spending and pour all of its national energy and resources into economic reconstruction. The US bases, therefore, were not just a military arrangement. They were a fundamental pillar of Japan's post-war economic miracle. This created a deep, path-dependent relationship that is now incredibly difficult to untangle. Japan is now one of the world's wealthiest nations, yet its entire defense architecture is still fundamentally reliant on a framework created when it was at its weakest. Any significant change to the US presence would require a complete and politically explosive remilitarization of Japan, altering its post-war identity. Today, the number of US personnel is down to approximately 53,000, but they are concentrated in some of the most strategic locations on Earth. This presence is most concentrated in one place, Okinawa. The island of Okinawa is the epicenter of America's military power in the Pacific, and the epicenter of the controversy that surrounds it. Despite accounting for less than 1% of Japan's total land area, Okinawa hosts over 70% of the land used exclusively for US military facilities in the country. Why such a dense concentration? After World War II, as the Cold War began, the Pentagon identified Okinawa as a vital strategic location for projecting power across Asia and containing the Soviet Union. This legacy endures. The island is home to Kadena Air Base, the largest US air installation in the Asia-Pacific. Kadena is a forward power projection platform, a massive hub operating F-15 fighter jets, KC-135 refueling tankers, and E-3 Sentry AWACS, Airborne Warning and Control System aircraft. Its mission is unambiguous: to defend US and Japanese interests and ensure regional stability through overwhelming air power. On the main island of Honshu near Tokyo lies another pillar of American power, United States Fleet Activities Yokosuka. This is the headquarters of the US 7th Fleet, the largest of the Navy's forward-deployed fleets. The scale of the 7th Fleet is immense. It typically comprises 50 to 70 ships and submarines, 150 aircraft, and around 27,000 sailors and Marines. Its area of responsibility is staggering, stretching from the international date line in the Pacific to the India-Pakistan border in the west. Yokosuka serves as the primary logistics and repair hub for this massive force, making it indispensable for sustaining US naval operations across the entire Western Pacific and Indian Ocean. Just across the sea from Japan lies the most heavily fortified border on Earth. The US military presence in South Korea is a direct consequence of the Korean War, a brutal conflict that ended in a 1953 armistice but never a peace treaty. To deter a second invasion from the north, the United States and the Republic of Korea, ROK, signed the 1953 Mutual Defense Treaty just 2 months after the fighting stopped. The treaty's core provision commits both nations to provide mutual aid if either faces an external armed attack. To make this commitment credible, Article 4 of the treaty grants the United States the right to station its military forces in and around South Korea. This deployment, which currently stands at about 28,500 personnel, acts as a tripwire. The logic is simple and stark. Any attack on South Korea would inevitably kill American soldiers, guaranteeing an immediate and massive US response. For decades, the heart of this US presence was Yongsan Garrison, located in the center of Seoul. This placed American command and troops squarely within the range of a massive barrage from North Korean artillery, positioned just across the Demilitarized Zone, DMZ. But in one of the largest peacetime relocation projects in Department of Defense history, the US has consolidated its forces. This was a colossal undertaking. A 2004 land swap agreement paved the way for the US to move its forces south of the Han River, out of the immediate range of most North Korean artillery. The destination was Camp Humphreys. The expansion of Camp Humphreys has been nothing short of monumental. It is a $10.8 billion project that has transformed a modest airfield into the largest overseas US military base in the world. The base has tripled in size, now spanning nearly 3,500 acres. It is, in effect, a self-contained American city, transplanted into the South Korean countryside. It has housing towers for a population expected to exceed 45,000 soldiers, civilian employees, and their families. It has its own schools, a massive post exchange, a water park, a state-of-the-art golf course, and dozens of restaurants. It is home to the headquarters of United States Forces Korea, the 8th U.S. Army, the 2nd Infantry Division, and Desiderio Army Airfield, the busiest U.S. Army airfield in Asia. The U.S. Army calls it the largest power projection platform in the Pacific, with a clear mission to be ready to fight tonight. This massive base is not just a military outpost, it's an economic engine. The expansion project, 92% of which was funded by the South Korean government, has profoundly reshaped the local economy of Pyeongtaek. The influx of investment and personnel has turned the once agricultural region into a major international logistics hub, attracting global giants like Samsung and LG to build massive industrial complexes nearby. The base directly and indirectly employs thousands of Koreans, often at wages higher than the local average, while the presence of nearly 45,000 American consumers has fueled a boom in local businesses and real estate. This has created an incredibly powerful local constituency with a multi-billion-dollar incentive to support the US presence, a factor that often complicates national-level debates about the future of the alliance. The American commitment to South Korea's defense isn't just about boots on the ground, it's also about a high-tech shield in the sky. In 2016, the Allies agreed to deploy a Terminal High-Altitude Area Defense (THAAD) battery. THAAD is a U.S. anti-ballistic missile system. It is designed to intercept and destroy incoming short- and medium-range ballistic missiles during their final or terminal phase of flight. Using hit-to-kill technology, its interceptors physically collide with the incoming warhead at extremely high altitudes. The system deployed in South Korea is strategically placed to protect key southern ports and infrastructure, the very locations where U.S. reinforcements would arrive in a conflict. Its purpose is purely defensive, designed to counter the specific threat posed by North Korea's growing missile arsenal. Moving south from the massive permanent garrisons of Northeast Asia, the U.S. military footprint changes. Here, the strategy is not about large standing armies, but about access, flexibility, and partnerships. It's a more modern, distributed model built for the complexities of the 21st century. The Philippines has a long and complicated history with U.S. bases. For most of the 20th century, it was home to two of the largest American military installations outside the United States, Clark Air Base and Subic Bay Naval Base. These were sprawling hubs of American power, crucial for logistics during the Vietnam War. But in 1991, the eruption of Mount Pinatubo devastated Clark Air Base, and in a surge of nationalism, the Philippine Senate voted to reject a treaty that would have extended the lease on the bases. By 1992, the last U.S. forces had departed, ending nearly a century of a major, permanent American military presence. For 2 decades, that was the end of the story. But the geopolitical landscape shifted. China's growing assertiveness in the South China Sea, including its construction of artificial islands and harassment of Filipino vessels, pushed Manila back toward Washington. This led to a new kind of arrangement. The Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, EDCA, signed in 2014, represents a completely different model. Under EDCA, the United States is not building its own permanent bases. Instead, it gains rotational access to existing Philippine military bases. This allows the U.S. to pre-position equipment, supplies, and fuel, and to construct and upgrade facilities for joint use by both American and Filipino forces. The strategic logic is clear from the map. The 9 EDCA sites are chosen for their geography. 4 are located in northern Luzon, with a clear vantage point facing Taiwan. Others, like the one on Balabac Island in Palawan, sit on the edge of the contested South China Sea. This is a posture designed for maritime awareness and rapid response in the region's most critical flashpoints. This shift from massive, sovereign-like bases such as Subic Bay to a model of rotational access through agreements like EDCA reflects a fundamental evolution in U.S. military thinking. The large permanent garrisons of the Cold War became political lightning rods, creating friction over sovereignty and fueling anti-American sentiment that ultimately contributed to their closure. Furthermore, in the modern era of precision missiles, concentrating forces and assets in a few large installations creates a massive, tempting target. Agreements like EDCA and the basing arrangement in Singapore provide the US with crucial access and pre-positioning rights without the political baggage or the extreme vulnerability of permanent ownership. This allows the Pentagon to disperse its forces across a network of smaller, less conspicuous locations, often called a lily pad strategy. It's an approach that trades the heavy, permanent footprint of the past for a lighter, more agile network of access points, allowing forces to surge into a region when needed. This strategy is a direct response to both the political lessons learned in the 20th century and the military realities of the 21st. A few hours' flight south, the US employs an even quieter model of cooperation. Since a 1990 Memorandum of Understanding, the US military has had access to Singapore's world-class air and naval facilities, most notably Changi Naval Base. This is not a US base in the traditional sense. It is a host nation facility that supports a rotational American presence. This arrangement is strategically priceless. Changi Naval Base sits at the mouth of the Strait of Malacca, one of the world's most important maritime choke points. The US Navy uses the base as a logistics hub and a port of call for its ships. It facilitates the rotational deployment of assets like the Navy's littoral combat ships and P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft, which are crucial for monitoring the busy sea lanes of Southeast Asia. More recently, it has even hosted deployments of high-altitude RQ-4 Global Hawk surveillance drones, extending America's intelligence-gathering reach across the region. In the vast expanse of the Middle East and Central Asia, the US military footprint is shaped by a different set of priorities, ensuring the free flow of energy, combating terrorism, and containing regional adversaries. This is the domain of the US Central Command, or CENTCOM, and its network of bases is designed for rapid response and sustained operations in one of the world's most volatile regions. The foundation of America's modern military posture in the Persian Gulf can be traced back to a single speech. In his 1980 State of the Union address, responding to the twin shocks of the Iranian Revolution and the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, President Jimmy Carter laid down a new pillar of US foreign policy. The Carter Doctrine stated unequivocally that any attempt by an outside force to gain control of the Persian Gulf region would be regarded as an assault on the vital interests of the United States and would be repelled by any means necessary, including military force. With these words, the United States formally took over the role of security guarantor for the Gulf, a position the British had abandoned in 1971. This doctrine necessitated the creation of a robust basing infrastructure to project and sustain American power. Over the subsequent decades, this infrastructure grew into a trifecta of power. First, there is the air power hub, Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. Constructed by the Qatari government in 1996 for over $1 billion, this sprawling facility became the nerve center of US air operations in the region. In 2003, the Pentagon moved its Combined Air Operations Center, CAOC, here from Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia, seeking a more politically stable environment. Today, the CAOC at Al Udeid commands and controls coalition air power across a 21-nation area of responsibility, from Syria and Iraq to Afghanistan. The base hosts over 11,000 US and coalition personnel and a formidable fleet of bombers, tankers, and surveillance aircraft. Second, there is the Maritime Command, Naval Support Activity Bahrain. This facility is the home of the US 5th Fleet and US Naval Forces Central Command, NAVCENT. Evolving from a small Royal Navy installation that the US took over in 1971, NSA Bahrain is now the command center for all US naval operations in the Middle East. The Fifth Fleet's mission is to ensure maritime security and stability across 2.5 million square miles of water, including the world's most critical energy choke points: the Strait of Hormuz, the Suez Canal, and the Bab al-Mandeb. Third, there is the logistics backbone, Camp Arifjan in Kuwait. Established in the late 1990s after the 1996 Khobar Towers bombing in Saudi Arabia prompted a move to a more secure remote location, Arifjan is the logistics linchpin for the entire theatre. It is home to the 1st Theatre Sustainment Command and serves as a massive forward logistics base. During the Iraq War, it was where tens of thousands of US military vehicles were up-armored before heading into combat. Most critically, it houses the Army Prepositioned Stocks 5, APS 5, entire brigades worth of tanks, armored vehicles and supplies stored in climate-controlled warehouses, ready to be issued to rapidly deploying troops at a moment's notice. In the monarchies of the Persian Gulf, hosting a US military base is a fundamental act of statecraft. It is not simply about the United States projecting its power outward. It is about the host nation securing a powerful security guarantee and diplomatic leverage, often against its own regional neighbors. Small but incredibly wealthy states like Qatar and Bahrain exist in a dangerous neighborhood, flanked by larger powers like Saudi Arabia and Iran. By investing billions of their own funds to build and upgrade these bases, they are purchasing an unparalleled insurance policy. An attack on Qatar, for example, is now also an attack on a critical US command center and the 11,000 American personnel stationed there. This reality was vividly demonstrated during the 2017 diplomatic crisis when Saudi Arabia and the UAE imposed a blockade on Qatar. The American presence at Al Udeid was a powerful deterrent against further escalation. The base effectively becomes a human shield of American troops, turning the host nation into a de facto US protectorate. This dynamic creates a competitive environment where Gulf states vie to be the most attractive partner for the US military, giving Washington significant diplomatic leverage while also entangling it deeply in complex and often volatile regional rivalries. The US experience in Central Asia offers a stark contrast to the enduring presence in the Gulf. Following the September 11th attacks, the Pentagon urgently needed bases to support the war in Afghanistan. It quickly secured agreements to use two key airfields, Karshi-Khanabad, or K2, in Uzbekistan, and Manas Air Base in Kyrgyzstan. These bases were vital logistical hubs for Operation Enduring Freedom. But this foothold was always tenuous. The bases highlight the fragility of basing rights in politically volatile regions. In 2005, the United States was evicted from K2 by the Uzbek government after Washington condemned a violent crackdown on domestic protesters. The base at Manas lasted longer, but was ultimately closed in 2014 after years of sustained political pressure from Russia on the Kyrgyz government. The legacy of these bases is not just geopolitical, it is also human. Service members stationed at K2 were exposed to a toxic cocktail of environmental hazards, including petrochemical contamination from leaking Soviet-era fuel systems, particulate matter, and even low-level radiation from destroyed Soviet missiles. Veterans groups have since linked these exposures to unusually high rates of cancer among those who served there. This brief but consequential chapter in US basing history serves as a powerful reminder that in many parts of the world, basing rights are transactional, temporary, and can be revoked on short notice, making them unreliable platforms for long-term strategy. For decades, the global network of US bases was an unquestioned asset, a symbol of unmatched power and reach. But in the 21st century, that conventional wisdom is being challenged. The very fortresses that once projected strength are now seen by many strategists as sources of profound vulnerability. The central argument is simple. US overseas bases, once considered safe havens from which to launch operations, have now become the primary targets in any potential conflict with a peer competitor like China. From Beijing's perspective, these forward-deployed forces are not defensive garrisons. They are offensive platforms positioned for a potential decapitation strike against the mainland. This threat is made real by the formidable capabilities of China's People's Liberation Army Rocket Force, PLARF. A sobering 2024 report from the Stimson Center, a non-partisan think tank, modeled the effects of a Chinese missile attack on U.S. air bases. The findings were stark. Conventional missile barrages could close runways at bases in Japan for over a month and in Guam for more than a week. This is a critical vulnerability. Most U.S. combat aircraft, including advanced fifth-generation fighters, lack the internal fuel capacity to reach a flashpoint like the Taiwan Strait and return without aerial refueling. If the tankers can't take off from those disabled runways, a huge portion of American air power is effectively neutralized. The problem is compounded by a glaring deficiency on the ground, a lack of hardened aircraft shelters. A recent Hudson Institute report highlighted this hardening gap, noting that while China has built over 3,000 hardened or individual aircraft shelters at its airfields, the US has added only a few dozen in the entire region. The implication is chilling. In a conflict, the overwhelming majority of US aircraft losses would likely occur on the ground at airfields before they ever see combat. This reality transforms America's greatest strategic asset into its greatest strategic liability. The vulnerability of these forward bases creates a dangerous use-it-or-lose-it dilemma that could dramatically accelerate escalation in a crisis. In the tense opening hours of a standoff, US commanders would know that their most valuable assets, multi-billion-dollar aircraft carriers and fleets of advanced fighter jets, are sitting ducks. This creates immense pressure to use these forces preemptively, to strike before they can be destroyed on the ground. This dynamic flips the logic of deterrence on its head. Instead of providing stability, the vulnerability of the bases injects profound instability. It lowers the threshold for war, as both sides might perceive a decisive advantage in striking first. The bases are no longer just a tripwire for defense, but a potential magnet for attack, a reality that military strategists refer to as the challenge of opposed operational access in an anti-access area denial A2AD environment. Beyond the strategic risks lies a more intimate and immediate human cost. The massive concentration of foreign military forces inevitably creates friction with the local communities who live in their shadow. Nowhere is this friction more apparent than in Okinawa. The daily lives of Okinawans are shaped by the constant presence of the US military. The incessant roar of jet engines and helicopters from bases like Kadena and Futenma is not just an annoyance, it's a public health crisis. Studies have documented how the noise pollution leads to severe sleep deprivation and is linked to higher rates of hypertension and ischemic heart disease. Residents have filed numerous lawsuits, winning millions of dollars in damages from the Japanese government, yet the flights continue day and night. The friction goes beyond noise. A history of accidents and high-profile crimes committed by US service members has created deep-seated resentment. This has led to protests of people, sometimes over 80,000, demanding the removal of the bases. These incidents, though not frequent, leave lasting scars on the community's relationship with the military. Then there is the environmental toll. US bases in Okinawa have been a source of significant pollution for decades. In recent years, the most alarming issue has been the widespread contamination from PFAS, a family of toxic forever chemicals found in firefighting foam that was used extensively in training exercises on bases like Kadena and MCAS Futenma. These chemicals have leached into the local water supply, contaminating the drinking water for an estimated 450,000 people. This is not just an Okinawa problem. In South Korea, a long history of crimes by US soldiers and environmental damage from bases has periodically fueled waves of anti-American sentiment, often focused on the perceived inequities of the Status of Forces Agreement, SOFA, that governs the legal status of U.S. personnel. In the Philippines, the establishment of new EDCA sites has been met with protests from local and indigenous communities over land grabbing, displacement, and the fear of being dragged into a future US-China conflict. Proponents of the bases often argue they are economically vital to local communities. However, the data often tells a different story. In Okinawa, for example, base-related revenue has declined from over 15% of the prefectural economy in 1972 to just about 5% today. More tellingly, studies of land returned by the US military show that commercial redevelopment generates vastly more economic activity, jobs, and tax revenue than the bases ever did. This challenges the long-held narrative that these local economies are fundamentally dependent on the American military presence. Finally, there is the question of how this network is perceived by its primary strategic competitor. From Washington's perspective, the bases are defensive, meant to deter aggression and maintain a stable, rules-based order. From Beijing's perspective, the map tells a different story. US bases in Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines form what military strategists call the first island chain, a geographic barrier that effectively hems in China's coastline. Chinese leaders have explicitly stated that they view this posture as an act of all-around containment, encirclement, and suppression by the United States. A growing number of Western analysts, particularly at think tanks like the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, argue that this perception is not just propaganda. They contend that the US forward-deployed posture is inherently provocative and fuels a dangerous security dilemma. By positioning powerful military forces on China's doorstep, the US incentivizes Beijing to accelerate its own military modernization to counter the perceived threat, leading to a tit-for-tat escalation that makes both sides less secure. This dynamic is most acute at the region's most dangerous flashpoint, Taiwan. US bases in Okinawa and the Philippines would be absolutely essential for any American military intervention in a conflict over the island. This strategic reality turns the host nations into de facto participants in a war they might desperately wish to avoid, making their territory a primary target for the People's Liberation Army from the opening moments of a conflict. The debate over America's overseas military presence is more critical than ever. Are these bases a necessary cost for global security, or an unsustainable and provocative liability? Let us know your perspective in the comments below.